creativity, embodying the day-to-day contributions of Black professionals that are often overlooked beyond the month of February. Who knew? So this conversation celebrates our collective agency, acknowledging those who work diligently behind the scenes and sometimes in the back of organizations. It's a call to recognize our year-round presence and contributions. And today we take a step forward to voice our experience, our insights. So join us as we embrace this moment of agency and dialogue. Yolanda is our resident artist. She is deeply invested in advocating for equity and social justice. Through her lens, we'll navigate the intersections of creativity, futurism, and the rich tapestry of the African diaspora and space. As someone who collaborates closely with local government and the community through her work at Esri and North Star GIS, Yolanda enriches our dialogue with her commitment to addressing critical issues and her passion for storytelling through her photography. Beyond her professional endeavors, Yolanda's personal journey is capturing the essence of Black Chicago artists, amplifies our conversation, inviting us to consider the role of art and technology in shaping just futures. Welcome to the stage, Yolanda.
Thank you for having me. How are you, Aisha?
I'm well. How are you today?
I'm good. It's cold though in Chicago, but the sun's out, so I'm happy that's going on. But I'm happy to be here. This is exciting.
All right, good. I'm glad to have you here. Oh, I couldn't wait to get you on the seat. Okay, so let's dive in. I do a lot of mindfulness, and I love that your art is centered around the concept of chi and the spiritual energy that influences your approach to capturing the geographical landscape and the urban built environment. So tell us a little bit about how chi impacts your day-to-day work, your work as an urban geographer, your work in your artistry.
And I really appreciate that question. That's the first time someone's asking me that. But so I'm a photographer, storyteller, photojournalist, and I wear a lot of different hats, but really focusing on the chi aspect of things. The name of my photography work is called Imagery by Chioma. So Chioma is actually an Igbo name that comes from Nigeria. And shout out to my mom. She's a Yoruba woman, so I'm not, we don't do, the divide. But my point is that Chioma is one of my other names. A lot of people know me as Yolanda. A lot of people may know me as Chioma. So if you ever see the CHI component of the name, whether it's Chiboy, Chinedu, Chioma, Chioma actually means God in Igbo. And when I was going through the process of naming my photography business, I actually didn't think I was going to name it after my name. I wanted to think of something eclectic and cool. But when I started thinking about it, it made sense, because growing up, my name was something that I appreciated, but then I was also ashamed of it as well, because a lot of people made fun of my name when I was growing up. So it was more of like a reclaiming of my name. And Chioma, chi means God, but the other aspect of the name is great God. So if you ever again see the chi of anyone's name who's of Nigerian descent, that means chi. As I was looking more into the term chi, I actually found out in about 4 other languages that include, I believe, Chinese, Japanese, and Greek. It had a very similar title. It might have meant energy or force or something that was powerful, something kind of greater than you. And so that really intrigued me. And I said, oh, I definitely, definitely need to name this term my business. And the reason why is because I think a lot of what I do, not only as a photographer, but as a mother, as someone who's deeply invested in her community, it was important for me to really show the aspect of the spiritual realm, because we are spiritual beings. And I think what was also important was the way in which I helped to create an environment when I was taking someone's photo. There's a lot of statements that people say when you capture someone's image, it's a very spiritual thing, because it's literally capturing your image, your essence, your reputational brand. Some people will say that too. So I thought it was really telling for me to ensure that when I was capturing someone's image, I was very intentional about the atmosphere, creating a very positive and energetic experience where it was transactional to say, I want to be able to provide a really welcoming and powerful experience for you that really changed the way in which you see yourself. Most people that I take their pictures of, they don't like the aspect of, oh, I'm getting my photo taken. So I wanted to change that narrative and bring a sense of not even just pride, but just a sense of like, wow, I see myself in a different way. I actually like what I'm seeing. And so I think that is really important when you're able to see yourself and honor yourself and value yourself as a spiritual being. That was really important for me to focus that as a photographer. And it still stays with me. It's definitely embedded into every photo shoot, every engagement that I have as a photographer. So.
Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper with that.
Mhm.
So you're an urban geographer. I
Mhm.
have heard this term, the built environment, and when you
Yes.
talk about creating spaces that are safe for your subjects to lean into and really be in the moment and really harness that chi, that spiritual energy.
Mhm.
What role does chi, the built environment, GIS play in how you view and how you navigate your day-to-day business as a GIS professional?
It plays a lot because, I think for a lot of times when I'm thinking about the spaces that I'm in, I can't assume that they're always safe. It's important to have those conversations because I may get it wrong. For a lot of people, and I'll give an example. When I did my first photo series, and when I say a series, it's really a collection of stories that are told within the images that I'm capturing. So I've been really blessed. This is my third photo series I've done, but the first one I did was really powerful because it was definitely tied to location in terms of the atmosphere. Um, it was really important for the 12 participants of my first photo series that they were embedded into nature. And the reason why was because, at least from my understanding, and I minored in history, and so I was really blessed to learn so much about the histories of the diaspora that I didn't know. I thought I knew it, and I was like, I did not understand the depth of what has happened to various people of African descent globally. So it opened my eyes, and there's still a lot that I don't know. But the conversations around nature, more specifically within the context of Black people in the U.S., was really important for me because there's certain statements that are said that people can resonate with. Oh, don't go into the woods, is dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because when you look at the history of the diaspora, the African diaspora, nature is deeply embedded. It's a spiritual connection, right, to the land, to communities, to how you're able to cultivate food and agriculture. So land and nature in some ways can be very powerful and spiritual, in other ways it wasn't. And I think when you think about slavery in the US, a lot of nature was associated with the woods and lynchings. And so a lot of people, don't necessarily think about that in terms of the idea of safety. And so my goal, and I talked to every participant, it was important for me to kind of change the narrative about our connection to nature and kind of reclaiming the fact that this was a beautiful space. And it is to this day, it can be. There was unfortunately a period of time where it may have shifted because of issues of injustice in terms of slavery, in terms of just the atrocities that happened to Black people in the States. And I wanted to kind of find a way of using the photography to reclaim that and having a oneness and a connectivity to nature in the built environment. So that was really important for me. It still is today, but I think when I did that first photo series, I was very intentional to say, we're literally going to be in a field of grass. I put people in weeping willows just to
Yeah.
touch and feel where they were at. So that was really important for me.
So I love that. I love that. I'm a gardener. I
Yes,
feel like I'm connected to the earth.
right. My plant's right here. I can't pinpoint. Yes, I'm a plant mom.
I see. I see. Okay. All right. So I want to take a little bit of a step back,
Mhm.
and I realize as I'm doing this work that there are terms that have become very familiar to me that
Mhm.
are not always familiar to the people that I'm talking to. And so
Right,
sometimes I will talk at them and they will just
right.
look at me and not understand fully what I'm saying. And so can we talk about define the terms urban built environment and then define the term the African diaspora? I don't want to
Sure.
take for granted that people know what those two terms mean.
Right. No, I think that's important. And so when and urban has shifted and changed over time. I'm also an urban planner by training, and it's funny how we talk about urban planners, but sometimes urban is subjective and it shifts. Most of the time, when we're talking about the urban built environment, urban really meaning the city context. So a lot of people may look at cities and they might look at the ways in which cities are designed and built. It's usually framed where they're rural communities, urban communities, right, suburban communities, and usually when we're talking about these spaces, it's really about kind of the mecca of a particular region that may be perceived as vibrant or has high density, right, in terms of the number of people who are living in that space compared to maybe certain areas that are smaller in terms of population. And so usually from a general commons perspective, I think the urban built environment is really more of the ways in which a specific area is designed and built. And so when you say the urban built environment, it's literally the environment. It's that space that carries so much, whether it was by intentional design or by it being more organic. But it's usually the spaces that we kind of take place into and how it's designed, how it's manufactured, how it's co-opted, right? There's a lot of different facets to that. As far as the African diaspora, I believe it's really referring to people who identify within the continent of Africa, and how in many ways, whether it's because of colonialism, slavery, even just the idea of fleeing away, right? There's a deep connection that people from the continent are connected to, and they are either living or residing in different spaces, have it be Brazil, have it be the US, have it be, France. There's so many ways in which someone said this really powerful, and it's painful, but it's true. Looking at the continent of Africa and saying that's the motherland, unfortunately, people just have different fathers. Some of our fathers are French, some of our fathers are Portuguese, some of our fathers are Spaniards, right? Again, some of our fathers are Native, right? The ways in which so many Black people reside in different spaces, and there's a still common connectivity based on our features, based on our hair type, based on our food, right? Because the way in which the diaspora is connected are by those different associations, but it's still tied to this location of Africa, the continent, and it's just dispersed. We have different languages as well, but there's still that unified front of the Africanness of someone, but you're living somewhere else.
Okay. I mean, I think mind blown with that comment that Africa is the motherland and we just have different fathers. So
Right.
I'm going to pause there and let that just sink in.
Mm-hmm.
This is someone's lived truth.
Right.
Right. And so it's, it's nice play on words, but to really, really get to the root of what
Right.
that phrase says is a lot.
It is.
And
yeah.
So the theme of 2024 and this year's Black History Month is Afro-Futurism, geography, and art.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think, what role do you think your photography plays in contributing to the narrative of Afro-Futurism and how it can envision a more equitable future?
I think the role that I play, and I'm trying not to do this, but I feel like I want to draw other people in. There's so many artists that I know, but I think we have a collective responsibility to tell the untold story. I think there are moments that we sometimes have to tell the story that was told, but it was from other people who don't look, feel, or even identify with us. I was listening to a very interesting story on Instagram. It was really good. It was this professor, he's a Gullah professor. And, when we're thinking about Black History Month, I think for a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, there is a way to pacify the narratives and experiences of Black people in the States. And in many ways, some of us grew up learning about Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, I stopped there because I think they were the pillars of the type of individuals that we're always learning about. There are many more. I can say Harriet Tubman, but I think hopefully you understand that there are certain people that were considered safe to talk about. There's also been kind of a movement to say we don't need to be talking about MLK and Rosa Parks, let's talk about other people. But what I thought was really powerful about this story I watched was that, you know, this scholar professor was saying, no, we actually have to talk about the whole aspect of MLK, the whole aspect which has been either pacified, watered down, all these different things, because at a certain period of time, a lot of people did not like MLK. They thought he was crazy. They thought he was a radical. They thought that he was anti this, anti that. And for me, I was really happy to hear that, because what was also important was to say we need to talk about other people, but we also have to talk about MLK in the rawness of who he was. We have pacified so many stories about the Black experience, and it's just not the full story. I mean, it's so bad to the point that truth telling is at a cost. We have books that are being banned. We have art that's being taken away. We have artifacts that are living in areas that are not even connected to the continent, even though the continent created that, right? And so I think as artists, I believe we have a responsibility to project stories that are untold, but then also reclaiming some of the stories that have been co-opted. There's so many different terminologies. I think we have really powerful gifts. We showcase, we expose, we have an opportunity to create something visual that can be beautiful, but astoundingly painful, but it's truthful. And I think it allows us to think about a better future, right? Because the idea is understanding the past, being very present in terms of what's going on, but the experiences help us to better understand, well, what happened with MLK was terrible, because he wasn't just talking about the political piece, he was talking about the economic. We only talk about the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act, but we never talked about his stance in the Vietnam War. We never really got deeper into the fact that he went to India. We don't talk about the ways in which he was trying to push people to think and act differently. And we're seeing that more today. I want to give credit to people who are telling those stories, but they're being taken away. And I think as art, it's so visual, it's so astounding, it's so powerful. It makes you think, it makes you critique, but it makes you pause to almost kind of question the things that we're taught in terms of what we thought was the truth, but the truth in actuality has been hidden. And so we have real opportunities to use our art. Someone put in the chat that Frederick Douglass was the greatest president. But something that's really powerful, I'll say something really quick. When I did my first photo series, I talked about Frederick Douglass. And the reason why I did is that a lot of people don't know that he was the most photographed person in the country. This Black man, right? Biracial Black man who was the most photographed person. He did that very intentionally. If you look at any of his images, he has a very interesting look. It's almost like a subtle smile, but it's very stern, but it's very strong. And so he was very intentional. He wanted people to see Black people differently. And he knew that his photos would have a very defined imprint of how people viewed Black people. And so that was also important for people to just have the exposure of Black people in an image. And it did have a real deep impact for a lot of people. So I'm so happy. I think, Lerone, you brought up Frederick Douglass, but that's important too. We need to be seen in all of our authenticity through photos, through images, and so be it.
So thank you, Yolanda, for that. So we have this term that's called the lens, right? It's glass lens. It's our lived experience that informs the way that we view the world, right? Mm-hmm. And so artistry, creating art, and map making have the ability to represent the lens of its author or its creator. How heavy is the weight of that responsibility in both your artistry and your map making?
It's very heavy for a lot of reasons. I feel there's a two-pronged approach. In some ways it's heavy because, and I'm just being I don't want to say it's superficial, but you want to make sure it looks good. You want to make sure that people, either are drawn to it, they like it, they enjoy it, right? That's not the basis, but you want people to feel something with your art. You feel it, right? It may not be felt the same way. And I think as artists, we're always trying to invoke and make sure that people can feel something, whether it's good, bad, ugly. We want people to feel something. So in one way, the lens is ourselves. Like we have a lens that we need to actually have reverence and affirmation to. I have to just own and love what I do because my lens is being exposed. It's a very vulnerable thing to do. So when you're taking a shot, you do have this lens. It's a filter in some ways. It's also a shining light. It also can distort things. That lens is subjective. It can be whatever it wants to be, but it's coming from you and you just have to own it. So in one way, it's going to look a certain way. In another way, it's going to invoke something very different. So in terms of self, you have to own that. And that's a very vulnerable thing to do because now you're exposing yourself. I think the other responsibility is, especially as a photographer, and this is something I've wrestled with, when I take pictures of people, that's a huge responsibility for me. The current photo series, and this is in collaboration with Overflow After Dark Productions. It's based in a coffee shop and co-working space. It's a Black-owned business that just does so many things to really cultivate and create atmospheres for entrepreneurs to thrive. But one of the reasons why it's important is because history and location matter, right? It's located in a formerly Black-owned recording studio that a lot of people don't know about in Chicago. This place hosts so many people, Jackie Ross, Curtis Mayfield, so many prominent artists from the 50s, 60s, 70s were in this building. A lot of people don't know that this Black-owned recording studio housed the Beatles before they blew up. A lot of people don't know that. So all to say, what we wanted to do was expose soul music and really show reverence for Chicago soul artists because so many of them don't feel that they get the recognition. I bring that up because I had the chance to photograph 12 different artists. I was terrified. I was terrified. It was different from my other photojournalism projects because these are artists. So now, and again, I've used this term before, it's their reputational brand. So whatever I'm capturing is literally them that's being exposed to the world in reverence to their music, in reverence to their story. So there's a deep responsibility and you want to be able to steward it well. You want them to like the photos, but you want to have a representation of them that you're able to show reverence and respect for. And so I think for me, that's why it's heavy for me because I have to come in one place to know there may be people who like it. There may be people who are bothered by it. There may be people who hate what you're doing. And you still have to have reverence and honor for what you're putting out there and technically not care what people think, but just to at least respect and honor the fact that this is going to show up in a certain way for people, but still have that reverence for yourself and the people that you're capturing the image. I hope that made sense, but I think it's too strong for me. You know?
It does. Okay, so let's bring it kind of half circle.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make the connection with map making and the work that you do in GIS. What do
Yes.
you feel is your responsibility as a GIS professional when it comes to creating these maps, when it comes to laying out these case studies for people, and how does that connect with your social justice work?
I think for me, and I've said this all the time, the truth will set you free. I've always been troubled. I've been troubled by the way in which, again, we water down the story. As someone in the GIS professional space, a lot of my conversations are to influence and to expose and provide information and resources about the technology to make real impact in the world. There are times where we might have a solution or where we will have a product, and it's very clear that it's a very one-sided approach to how the story is being told. And a lot of times, and it's changing now, but when you typically are the same person expressing the same issue, it's heavy because now that you're exposed, right? We talked about that lens that you're able to create the project or create the image and you're exposing yourself. It's the same way with map making. There's a way in which you can use data to distort the truth. I tell people all the time that data sometimes is actually racist. Data sometimes is actually a false way of how you're able to capture a story, but using it in a way to influence people that actually causes harm to other people. So for me, A lot of it has been to be like, wait a minute, hold on. Let me ask. I ask a lot of questions. One of my closest friends, she's really big on the love languages. She says asking questions is a love language. So before I start to jump in to like give my feedback, I will ask a lot of questions to confirm or expose why you're doing what you're doing. And so I think in the GIS space, we have to do a better job of being honest about the fact that the ways in which we have done this work has been very narrow-minded, period. We're not hitting the levels that we need to, in my humble opinion. And a lot of people own that, of all racial and ethnic backgrounds. It's not just people of color saying that this is a problem. There are a lot of people who are saying, yeah, we've never liked how this was filtered, or we didn't like how the tapestry data looked a particular way, that created narratives and stereotypes about certain people. So someone's got to do it. And I think, for me, I've been in a lot of positions where I talk about data that has used language. I mean, let's just talk about the language. Language has been harmful. The way in which you title and categorize people, especially people of color, have been problematic. The ways in which you have maybe not acknowledged the core issue, right? I think one example was during COVID, there were a lot of maps to talk about vulnerable communities. You weren't naming what those vulnerable communities were. Why? Just call it out for what it is. So things like that had me in positions where I was like, I'm gonna get fired today. I'm gonna be honest with you. And I think the hard part about it is people desire, and you'd be shocked at how many people desire the truth. And as COVID came, obviously we saw COVID really expose the fact that we were not living in this post-racial world. I mean, we always talked about this, but COVID exposed that when we started to see particular communities, more specifically Black and brown communities, that were dying at a very higher rate than white communities, right? And really trying to understand, again, questioning why. Was it a language barrier? Was it the fact that there wasn't information and resources that were being exposed to those communities? The maps were showing it every day, and we saw that. Obviously with George Floyd, very locationalized area. I tell people all the time, if you knew the history of Minneapolis, right? Again, the lens was Minneapolis is great. It's diverse. There's a strong multi-ethnic community. School systems are beautiful and flourishing. I know a lot of people are creating that narrative. But when I would talk to other people, the story was very different. They would say, Yolanda, I'm not surprised. This is Minneapolis. If you know anything about Minneapolis's police department, this has been going on forever. So again, the stories are now shifting. So whose story is legit? We like to legitimize certain people and then make other people around, they're just not getting the affirmations in terms of their story. So I think COVID exposed that to say, yeah, we're still dealing with this stuff. And again, location matters. This didn't happen in your traditional city that we hear about. This didn't happen in Oakland. This didn't happen in Los Angeles. This did not happen in New York. It's happening all over. And Minneapolis is no different. And so I think people are starting to wake up to say, oh, wow, I thought this would have happened over here, but this is happening in Minneapolis, which is considered in many ways a thriving city that had all these different resources. No, it's the same issue, and it's scattered, and it happens in these different enclaves. So I think for me, the biggest thing for me to kind of, what's heavy for me is literally just calling it out. It doesn't matter how my tone is. It doesn't matter if I'm being professional and respectful. It's still irking people because now they have to own their stuff. They have to be honest about the fact that maybe you spent 20 hours creating this data set and it's problematic. You need to change it.
Right.
I spent 20 hours in it, right? But it's wrong.
Right. And so just so that folks understand that as we do this work, it is very risky as a Black person, as a marginalized identity, as it is very risky to do this work. And even if you ask the question softly, why didn't you just change the data, right? Because it's not enough to just say, yeah, right. Folks are real comfortable saying, yeah, that map always bothered me. That data always bothered me. What was missing in that categorization always bothered me. But they're so used to saying that and then moving on with their life. And I know I have started to lean into, and it sounds like you have too, well, why didn't you change it? Because if I'm going to be uncomfortable with the map and the data you displayed, And we're all looking at it saying, yeah, it's causing harm and it's lacking. And you're going to go back to your home community and be like, yeah, but I'm okay with that. And I have to go back to my home community and live with the outcome. We're all about to be uncomfortable with me asking the question,
Right.
why don't you change it? Right. So that's point number one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Point number two that you hit on with the COVID epidemic, the COVID crisis exposing so much. Last week, Zareth Pineda had a session on segregation is killing us.
Yeah.
I recommend you each go and take a look at her story map. Powerful and very simple. It's, there are some things that you just can't gloss over, and some patterns of behavior that is just like it's staring you right in the face. And I think it is up to each of us, on a localized human level and on a global level, to say what to do with this information now, because if it impacts me, I'm not going to stand there and be comfortable wringing my hands like I don't know what to do with this problem. I'm just going to say, there's the solution. Let me walk over that barrier and help make that solution possible. So thank you for taking us through that journey and your thought process. So considering North Star GIS's emphasis on equity representation, how do you select your subjects and the locations to reflect these values? So your values as an artist, right? So we do have, when we tell stories, we do have the agency to choose the care and concern that we use to tell these stories, the locations that we use to mark these stories, right? And so during the homecoming event, there was one of the speakers said, there's something about people telling their own stories or people capturing their own neighborhoods versus people coming in and capturing what they think exists in your neighborhood. So can you tell me your approach to doing that, and how that appears in your art, and if there's a particular series that captures the value of place and neighborhoods and space?
Oh, I appreciate that question. I think, and I'll be very transparent in saying, the last 3 photo series projects I've done have really focused on the diaspora, the African diaspora. So most of the participants for the last 3 have been of Black people of African descent. My first series, I didn't really know what I was doing. I just wanted to do something. So it was people that I knew. It focused on 12 different individuals, and they were family. Some of them were close friends. Some of them were just people that I associated with, that I was like, I just want to hear your story. When I think about the questions I ask, I really actually give the floor open to them. And so with my first photo series, it was literally focused on 3 topics for them. And that is how we created the foundation of the story. It was, what are 3 pressing issues that you face with as people of African descent, as Black people? And every story was different. And what was great about that is that it didn't force me to try to box them into a conversation. They chose what they wanted to talk about. So I wanted to give them the freedom and the expression to be able to say, look, being a Black woman and dealing with dating is something I deal with. Being a Black man and police-related issues is something. I had people talk about issues related to maternity and health and not feeling like they were heard as a Black woman in the health field. I had people talk about the importance of family. I had people talk about the importance of really being connected to other people and not really feeling that they can be connected. I had people talk about mental health issues. So that was kind of a cool project. The second one was actually focused on women. And that actually came from a period of time where I was hearing a lot in the news. I didn't know this was going to happen. I actually wanted to do a photo series on Chicago and economic development. I didn't know what it was going to look like. But at that time, there were a number of different issues that were happening to Black women in terms of attacks, in terms of even incarceration, where, the number of women who are Black women who are incarcerated, that number is increasing steadily over a period of time. I was just really drawn to that reality, and I just randomly chose 4 Black women that I wanted to talk to. And it was a similar approach. The last one, and I'll be short. The last one was really organic as well. You know, I'm originally from California, born and raised, and I have been blessed to live in Chicago for over a decade. Chicago has my heart. No shade to Cali. I love Cali, but Chicago has drawn me so much into the beauties of the city, but then also the challenges of this windy city. I mean, from issues related to being hyperly segregated. I call it a tale of three cities. I think it's not just two cities. There's so many issues going on, but just locationally, there's so much activity happening for good or bad that everything is locational. We're called the city of neighborhoods, for better or worse. And I think every neighborhood you go to has a different vibe and feel. But when you understand the histories and the atrocities of what have happened to people of African descent, Black folks, and how they have shifted from one place to another, whether it be coming from the south side of Chicago, moving to the west side, and all of the different realities of that, I wanted to be able to talk about Chicago. It just so happened, the collaboration that I have with Overflow After Dark Productions, because the focus was music, because the focus was on Black Chicago, because the focus was on these artists who don't feel that they get the recognition that they rightfully should deserve. That was a focus. It was one conversation that we had with Jackie Ross. And please, you all, if you could look up Jackie Ross, she has an amazing story, amazing soul artist in the Chicago area, worked very closely with Sam Cooke and so many other artists during a very pivotal time in soul music. She came to the coffee shop. We were doing kind of a book series with a writer who was talking about so many soul artists. Shout out to Aaron Cohen. But long story short, she felt so appreciative and she got teary-eyed, and she felt that she never got the recognition and just the awareness of what contribution she had. And this was very locational because so many artists in Chicago are leaving the city. They're going to Los Angeles, they're going to Memphis, they're going to Portland, they're going to New York to jumpstart their careers in music. And when you think about Chicago, I mean, Chicago, like soul music, and again, you think about the lived experience, right? When you think about slavery, from being taken away from your homeland on the continent of Africa, and then being embedded in the South, and then having to flee, right? Post-slavery, literally migrating and going to different spaces because of terrorism and fear, that's all locational. So even just understanding the history of soul music, where it was coming from, which was a formation of blues and jazz and so many other genres of music, but how you trace that to Chicago was so important locationally. We had to capture it. So all to say, OAD Productions, we were able to collaborate and talk about this one centralized area that so many people know globally. We had some UK attendees come to this space. They told you everything about soul music. So the crazy part is that, again, location matters. Chicago is a global city that has so many recognitions, and so many people from around the world look at Chicago and they talk about house music. They talk about soul music. They talk about the impact. That's huge, and that's so locational. And we need to make sure that we're affirming that and sharing those stories. So again, a lot of what I do is really embedded into the idea of not only map making, but how location matters. We need to show reverence to our artists, right? People know Chicago globally. They travel across the world to come to our festivals. So all of that matters in terms of tourism, economic impact, how dollars can be trickled into the city, but how we can support our artists locally so they don't leave. They're leaving, they're fleeing, and we want to show reverence to that, but then also call it what it is. Soul music is Black music. It is.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to say it. It is. So many people have benefited from it, but it is Black music. It has a different dynamic of how people sing these stories, and we have to show reverence for it. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So let me put a finer pin in it. So the question was, considering North Star of GIS's emphasis on equity representation, how do you select your subjects and locations to reflect these values? And I think what I heard in your lovely accounting of your brain space is that you do that by asking people, what is it that you want me to know about your space, about you, about your art, right? And I think that that's something that's missing as we delve deeper into colonialism and the impact of paternalistic,
Mhm.
noblesse oblige, like, yes, you're
Yeah.
hungry. Let me give you beets. When I'm
Mhm.
hungry, I actually want carrots and roast beef and potatoes, right? But somebody deemed that beets is what we all need and turnips is what we
Right.
need. And it's just like, if your goal is to work and partner with me in making this thing a better place, making this art better, or understanding my community, ask me what are the best things that I see in my space, or what is it the thing that I need from you in this moment in time and space, and then do that thing.
Right.
Otherwise, you have centered yourself, right? And
Right. Yeah.
so we're running short on time. So I think I have one last closing and one surprise for those of you who are still on, and thank you for joining us. So let me ask this last question. Reflecting on a theme of Afro-Futurism, art, and geography, how do you envision the future of Black representation in both the art and GIS communities?
I think it's kind of two-pronged. I think it's a bold affirmation of our identity, being affirmed and in tune with our identity. But then I think it's also about reclaiming the things that were stolen from us. Um, this is still a problem, and I think it's hard to pinpoint it. I think I'll give one example, and I think it's a very narrow-minded example. It comes up to me. I think even in terms of how we show reverence and honor for our craft. You think about these awards, like we're in award season, right? We just passed the Grammys and the Golden Globes are coming in, the Academy Awards, the Oscars. As Black people, we have created that already. But there's still this hierarchy of what is deemed to be better and right. And, I think I grew up watching these awards, but I was deeply impacted by NAACP Image Awards. I was deeply impacted by the Soul Train Music Awards. We have things that we can own and we can reclaim and we can show reverence for that compared to what has been deemed as better. I think when it comes to even how we do conferences, North Star, we were fortunate to have our first in-person, let me be clear. We've always had our conferences, they were virtual because of COVID, but we were blessed to have our first one in person in November. And that was huge. Other people are doing it and we can do it ourselves as well. And I think it's just more seeing the reclaiming of our value. I think there's still this idea of trying to compare ourselves to other entities and saying that we got to be like that. It's like, no, we are this. So let's just expose that. I think even in mapping, when I think about this, I just want to see the geospatial narratives and conversations look different. I want different colors. I want different languages. I want people to show more reverence. I want the visuals to look different. I mean, I want icons to look different. We're just now getting to the fact that people can get a Band-Aid and it shows their skin
Skin
tone,
tone.
right? Icons are shifting, right? And so I think something that I do for a lot of my clients is when I want to do a photo shoot with them, I will give them a Pinterest. So Pinterest is bomb. You can create visuals of what you want them to be. It doesn't matter what racial, ethnic background you are. I always show images of Black people. I don't care who you are. I want them to be able to see an example of an image that not only may look similar to what they are, but just to see representation. We're so used to seeing majority culture be the narrative. So when we go against that, people start questioning it. And I'm like, no, we are the narrative. Like we have just the same right and the honor. This is not to put anyone at the bottom. It's to show reverence for everyone as Black people. Black people create culture. Black people set trends. We do so many different things, but we have to be able to show up in a way and then own it too. So I know that was kind of all over the place, but I think it's an identity piece that I feel that we can have more ownership and not just pride, but just affirmation of who we are as people. Not only in terms of where we come from, but who we are now. And I think by understanding that, that will have a deeper impact on how we own and do things and then just have more reverence for it so we can all participate into it. We're always trying to have someone else own it, and then we try to be close to that. And I'm like, I'm kind of tired with that. We need to build different maps. We need different stories. We need to talk about things that may turn people off, but it means something that is near and dear to you. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to see in terms of place and infusing not only art, but the way in which location matters, but how the stories are told in a way that we can own it. And we're so embedded into who we are that it's almost so normal to talk about these issues, if that makes sense.
So I love that. I love that. Okay, I love that because certain things are cultural, right? And
Right.
so you talked about the homecoming from 2023.
Right.
You talked about owning and harnessing and just doing us, walking our lane. And
Mhm.
so some might call that the gaze.
Plug in. I love it. Yeah.
So when we talk about the gaze, so North Star is releasing its first ever podcast, which is premiering March 5th. If you are not already following the gaze, follow us. The trailer is now available on all listening platforms. It is available on our YouTube channel. And the concept behind the gaze was to create an audio representation of the 2023 homecoming event. And it is vastly different from the conversations that were held on stage. It is tied to the conversations that were held on stage, but it's intimate stories from geoluminaries such as yourself who presented at the 2023 homecoming event. And it is the Black gaze, the North Star gaze. We don't care who's watching. We're not trying to be anything other than who we are. And there is value and there is gold in them, their minds. So press play.
Imagine a racially just world through a racially just geography.
I hope that we organize around not achieving a seat at the GIS table, but making the table obsolete, which would mean sharing the power of mapping directly with the people most affected by mapping.
Welcome to the North Star Gaze, a podcast with intimate stories from geoluminaries.
We're coming together as a collective to celebrate people of African descent, the diaspora, and talking about geospatial equity and justice.
In these one-on-one chats, you'll explore their journeys and profound contributions to geography and GIS. Each episode offers a telescopic view into their lives to uncover the human side of geo, where passion meets purpose and racial justice is central.
How do we make sure that we're showing what's there and how the stories that people tell of their own community?
Tune in and let the brilliance of these geostars guide you.
This is us sharing our work and the work of the folks who do great things, sharing the stories of luminaries in geospaces.
The North Star Gaze. Follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Then explore northstargis.org for more inspiration to create a racially just world through a racially just geography.
And there you have it.
Yes.
This is us.
Yes.
And so I do want to say, if there's one thing you do today, please like, subscribe, share the trailer. And if
Imagine a racial
and so yeah, so I mean, if you know our story, then you will go and like and subscribe. But now we're going to take the opportunity. We have the last 10 minutes to open up the floor to questions from the listening attendees. Do we have any questions that we want to ask Yolanda?
I think that's Laurent. Is map a form of pitch deck? So just to clarify, I hope I'm getting this right. Are you saying in terms of how we market or how we're communicating? I want to make sure I'm getting that question correct. So is map a form of pitch deck? Do you mean it in terms of like how we're marketing and communicating stories? If that's what you mean, I mean, I would say yes. I think that's the thing. Mapping can sometimes be a narrow-minded visual, and it's an image. You know, like it's not that different as far as what you're capturing. So both. Okay, beautiful. Thank you. I want to make sure. I think it is. I think in many ways, when I talk to people about how we're addressing mapping, it's to inform, address, in some ways expose, but it's also allowing us to kind of think about what's going on. In many ways, at least in the field that I was in, I kind of assume we're making maps so we can solve a problem. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's just to be able to have people be aware. So when there might be opportunities to make a decision, you have a resource and you have information that helps you to be more informed. So when these opportunities come to make decisions, you can act upon it. But I think for me, a lot of it has been exposure. I think mapping can be a huge marketing tool. And I think that's where sometimes we've missed the mark. I mean, I'll give a perfect example. I want people to really understand that GIS can be for anybody. You could be a ballerina and use GIS. You could be an oceanographer and use GIS. You could be a community organizer and use GIS, because location is about the built environment. It's about where you live. It's about moving from one place to another. And that's everybody doing that. And so I think the marketing of how we use maps has been, in my opinion, this is just me, very narrow-minded, you know, because I think people have a lens of how mapping should be created, and we need to dispel that. I've seen amazing work that artists are doing when it comes to how people can see amazing shows and not be just in one place. There's opportunities to explore a city where talent is everywhere. These are artists using GIS, right? And so I think we have to change how we do marketing with mapping, because we're telling a very narrow-minded perspective, and so many people have something to share, and we need to honor that. We don't need to create these ideas of, well, this is more relevant because this is I don't know, a snowplow. That's important too, but there are other ways in which you can use mapping. So I hope I answered your question, Laurent. Hi, Marcus. Hey, Yolanda, really appreciate your Black. Thank you. Urban planning background. Does the word urban have a connotation? So that's the other thing. In many ways it has. It's subjected. It's shifted. There were conversations when I was in grad school about we need to stop calling ourselves urban planners. There's a lot of terminology that I think always changes over time, but urban has always been with focus on the inner city that is traditionally or labeled as poor people. That has a lot of issues as well, because there are poor people in other areas. There are poor people in the suburbs, poor people in rural areas, right? We don't talk in the same capacity about certain areas. Again, there was actually a season when I was an urban planner where a lot of urban planners wanted to talk more about the rural community that was being forgotten, and they happened to be located in poor rural areas. And so urban is a problematic term. What I tell people traditionally is that urban has meant the city, the dense populated city. And sometimes that has changed, but I think we need to reclaim and shift. We have a lovely way of like reusing words where I'm like, that's not what it means, but that's not me to tell you what to do. But urban in many ways has meant the ghetto. It's meant inner city. It's meant Black. It's meant brown. It's shifting. Now, I mean, there's urban socialites. There are ways that they're creating it that can be appeasable to wealthy people as well. Just because cities are changing, right? There's a certain time where cities were perceived as dangerous and not healthy. That's changed, where you're seeing downtown areas become more of the central business district. And now urban is being reclaimed for certain communities to mean something else. So I appreciate that perspective, Marcus. Yeah, urban renewal programs. A lot of that has been a lot of the focus on the city and what it represented at a certain time. If you think about New York City in the 80s and 90s, it had a certain visual and physical impact. And it also had to do with the fact that a lot of poor people were living in some of these areas in the city. That shifted. So now there's a different way of how we're defining urban. It's changing all the time. Thanks, Marcus. Exactly.
All right. Do we have one last question? All right. Yes, please. If you have not registered already, our next event is happening Tuesday, February 20th. Register at northstarofgis.org/BHM. And yes, and then be on the lookout for the replay series that's coming sometime in March. Women's History Month. And then do we have that that closing slide that has all of the updates and things to be on the lookout for as we close this out? Thank you, Yolanda, for joining us on the hot seat and for doing a wonderful job of representing all of us working behind the scenes, all of us working at our desks here at North Star of GIS. So thank you, honored.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you for interviewing me. You're really amazing. So I appreciate the conversation. And thank you everybody who joined and your questions and your feedback. I really appreciate it. I did put in the chat, I don't know if I can put it into the general, but the photo series on music and my other photo series are virtual. They're all online and they all have different stories, but please feel free to take a look. I'd love to hear your feedback. Music to My Soul is the most recent art series, and it really talks about these amazing Chicago artists in the city. So check it out if you're free. But thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate you.
Bye now.